In early life, the beginning of things with which you are so vitally interested today. I think that might be interesting to you for two reasons. First, you have asked for it from time to time, and I have hesitated to give it. It drags back too many memories. But I'm going to concede the request tonight more for the record than anything else, because I probably will never touch on some of these subjects again. And it will be nice to have it for the records in the tape. I want to give you the early history of chiropractic because I think it'll be interesting to you. I was up in Edmonton, Alberta. I got up at 5 o'clock and went down the elevator to walk the streets to see the town. And Dr. Young of Vancouver was going down on the elevator. He asked me where I was going, and I said out for a walk, too early for breakfast. He said, "Can I walk with you?" And I said, "Yes." So we walked for about an hour and a half. And he kept pumping me with questions on the early history of the beginning of chiropractic. And then we went into a little all-night lunch stand and had our breakfast. And he kept pumping me for questions. Finally, as we were walking back towards the hotel, he said, "DJ, I wish you'd give that talk to the people here today." And I said, "I don't think they'd be interested in that early history." He said, "Yes, you'll be surprised." And I gave it there. So I'm going to review it somewhat for you tonight. My father, as you probably know, was a Canadian. He was born in the backwoods, northeast of Ontario or Toronto. He was a backwoodsman, English-Scots descent. And as you know, the English can be very stubborn and very brutal at times, as a seeming roughness and gruffness that comes out of backwoods life. Well, Father was all that. My mother was a Creole, a cross between your Spanish and your French on a parish in Louisiana, and owned 900 slaves before the war, the Civil War. Father hated music, hated arts, hated sciences, had no use for the refinements of life because of his backwoods experience being a lumberjack. Mother, being a Creole, living in the top of society in Louisiana on this parish, had all the refinements. She loved music, loved the arts, painting, was a cultured, refined lady. She had her toddies served in bed in the morning, all that sort of thing. I was born at What's Your Hours, out here, a little town not very far from here. Father came down from Canada in about 1860. The whole family migrated. His father and mother, his 3 other brothers, and 4 sisters. And they all located in What's Your Hours. He often told the story that his mother was one of a pair of twins. The other one of the twins died at birth, and the one that lived only weighed 1.5 pounds at birth. So you can see how closely I come to not being here. Father migrated, as I said, with the family down into the United States in 1860. Shortly after, they were enrolling people for the Civil War. And in those days, a man had a right to buy off his service. And Father bought off a service by paying $500 to another man to take his place. So that Father never saw any war service. When Father moved down into Iowa, and finally I was born here, I've often wondered how we ever got together. Father Canada, Mother Louisiana, me in Iowa. Funny how we all got together. Now, Father moved to New Boston, Illinois, his first stop. There he went into the bee business and had at that time the largest bee raising industry in the United States. He used to take his honey to New York City by the carload. I remember him telling the story that when he came back, he used to call people's attention to the tumor that was growing on his right breast. Then he'd pull it out and show it was a bunch of currency that he got for the selling of the honey in New York, oftentimes coming home with as high as $5,000 for a carload of honey. So you see, Father's early life down there was on what he called Sweet Home. The home, the farm, was covered with locust trees, and this was locust honey that he used to take to New York. It was there he married his first wife, out of which came two children, a sister, or a half-sister, and a half-brother. The sister is buried on the top of the hill of Sweet Home. I remember once, about 15 years ago, of going down to Sweet Home. I had never been there, had never seen it, but I dug up his old friends, Will and Mary Kellogg of New Boston, and asked them to go out and take me to the farm. I asked Will where it was, and he said about 8 miles up the river. We watched the speedometer. We went 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12 miles, and I said to Will, where is the farm? And he said, well, it's just a little bit ahead. And I said, Will, we passed it. I remember seeing it when we went by it. Oh, he said, I know where it is. I've been out there 1,000 times. We went on about 15 miles, and I said, Will, I think you're lost. He said, well, maybe I am. Let's turn back. We turned back with the car, and when we came close to the farm, I said, Will, we're approaching the farm. Oh, no, he said, you're mistaken. I said, I'm not. He said, never been here? No. But I know this is Sweet Home. I've been here many times. Not in the flesh, but I've been here. We went up on top of the hill, and there was a little graveyard of my half-sister. My half-brother is buried out here at Davenport. Then Father from New Boston went to Letts, Iowa, and became a school teacher. And it was there he taught phrenology. If you'll go into the museum showcase, you'll see a photograph of the stage on which he had his models and his apparatus to teaching phrenology. Now, you see, in those early days, Father began investigating. He traveled a little bit, not very much, around through the country schools, teaching phrenology and studying the bumps and the elevations and valleys of the heads of people. From Letts, Iowa, he moved to Watts here, where I was born. There he peddled fish in a wheelbarrow, going around tooting his little horn, calling attention to the fact that he was selling fish. And he got those fish from a man named Barr here in Davenport, who only passed away a few years ago. I have met Mr. Barr many times, and he's told me how Father bought his fish from him. And from that came the name Fish Palmer that Fishbein used to parade up against Father. Fishbein of the American Mendicants Association. Father never denied that he peddled fish. He said that any industry that made an honest dollar was an honest business. And I recall some years later when we were seeking Iowa legislation, one of the senators on the floor ridiculed the fact that the man that started this movement was known as Fish Palmer. The senator got up and he said, yes, that is true. But I know that the man who has just spoken at one time was a bartender behind the bar. But what of it? Quick repartee. It was while Father was in what year that I was born. Now, what year was a pioneer, western, coal mining town? One of those rough and gruff towns, where it was all a man's life's work to step out of line. I was born in 1881. Mother always had her toddies in bed, and her breakfast was served in bed. I used to like the taste of the liquor that I would get in the milk. And then she would give me a few drops from day to day, because she knew that I liked it. One day, Father made the statement, I'm not going to raise this boy to be a drunkard. Next time he wants any, I'm going to give it to him. I'm going to give him all he cries for. Then I'm going to pour it down him. I'm going to make him so drunk he'll never want any liquor again. The memory of that still hangs on even today. In the earlier days, before Volstead days, DVDs, they used to serve liquors at a great many of the banquets that was given for me. If I was to see liquor in a white glass, I would immediately throw up. Or if I saw a colored glass with water in it, I would throw up. Or if I would smell it second-handed, I would throw up. So I always had to say at these banquets, now you go ahead and have your liquors. I'll wait out on the mezzanine. And when you're through, then I'll come in. I did that safeguard embarrassment to them as well as myself. And so today, I don't touch liquor of any kind, any hard liquor. And I never touched beer until I went to Germany, to Dresden, on the research work of the specimens you see in the osteo lab. And there I would ask for eine Glasse Wasser. Ja. And then I'd wait and never get it. Eine Glasse Milch. Ja. And then I'd wait and never get it. Eine Kuppe Kaffee. Ja. And then I'd wait and never get it. Finally, one day, in self-defense, eine Glasse Bier. Ja, and I got it at once. Well, I probably take 4 bottles of beer a year now. If I haven't anything else to do, I have a bottle of beer with somebody. But even that don't taste a bit good. There's a sort of a lingering memory of a year and a half old when my mother passed away. So I've never known what the love of a mother is. From that time on to this, I have had 5 stepmothers, every one a little meaner than the one before. And I don't say that with any disrespect, but it just happened to be Father's misfortune to pick the wrong ones every time. Now, it was while Father was teaching at Litz, Iowa, he sat in the rear of the schoolroom one night, and a spiritualist came down off the platform, walked back to him, and said to him, "You don't believe in our great and grand philosophy." I'll never forget the exact language. "You don't believe in our great and grand philosophy. But I see the name, Dr. Palmer, on a door. I see people coming to you from all over the world." Father laughed at her. Why wouldn't he? A practical thinker, had no more thoughts of spiritualism than anybody could want. But later on, that actually happened. Now, the first wife, as I said, had 2 children. The second wife had 3 children. Myself as the youngest, my sister Jessie, 2 years older, my sister May, 4 years older. Jessie passed away about 2 years ago in Bellingham, Washington. My older sister May is still alive, a cripple, deformed, almost a mental derelict, with which I'll tell you more a little later. Now, it was in 1885, when I was 4 years old, that Father moved to Davenport. But before he moved here, he moved from Wattier, Iowa to Burlington, Iowa. And there living was Paul Castor, the most famous magnetic healer in the United States. I've been there. I've seen his walls were crowded with crutches and braces. The good work that Paul Castor did. And one of the finest thoughts and memories that I have is that Charlie Castor, the son of Paul Castor, is one of the finest chiropractors we've ever turned out and is practicing chiropractic exclusively in Burlington, Iowa, and has for many, many years. Now, Father studied magnetic healing under this Paul Castor. I have no recollection, and I've never heard Father say what the teaching or instruction consisted of. I can't imagine it was very much, because Paul Castor wasn't running a school, and I don't think Father ever got a diploma or anything at that time. If he has, I've never seen it anywhere. Never heard him tell about getting one. But after Father learned magnetic healing from Paul Castor, he went downtown, and up on the 2nd floor, he rented a suite of rooms, and he lived in the rear of that suite of rooms. And I could tell you many interesting incidents of what happened. But one morning, Father called a painter, and he brought him up and he said, "I want you to put the words Dr. Palmer on the glass door." Then when Father came back from lunch, he looked at the door, and suddenly it dawned upon him. That's what the spiritualist had told him. And here it was, in reality. Father practiced there from 1885 to 1890, when he moved to Davenport. He rented a couple of rooms in what was then the Ryan block, and incidentally, WOC is now the Ryan home, or was the Ryan home. He rented a couple of rooms, then 3 rooms, then 4 rooms, moved up from the 2nd floor to the 3rd, and eventually on the 4th, and kept adding room after room until eventually he had the entire top 4th floor of 42 rooms. Now it was there he began to think out the ideas. But let me hesitate a moment to say that Father had a dining room and a kitchen, colored help, and he was living then with his 4th wife, and he had a private table where he and his wife ate their meals. All the other patrons had a big, long, regular boarding house table, served boarding house style. We children, the 3 of us, were never permitted to eat with Father and his wife at the table. We had to eat in the kitchen with the colored help. They were permitted to sit down. We had to eat standing up. We were never permitted to have any pie, cake, ice cream, or other forms of dessert. And I think we kids often wanted it. The result was that sometimes we would sneak into the kitchen at night and steal it out of the icebox. The stepmother found that out, and then she padlocked the icebox so that we couldn't get into it. I merely mention this by way of showing us some of the trials, troubles, and tribulations we had to go through. Now, it was while Father was living up there, engrossed in his thinking of his early ideas, that he left the running of the 42 rooms and the running of we children to the cruelest stepmother that anybody could ever want. She had been a paralytic. She crawled on her hands and knees up to the second floor to see Father as a patient. Father treated her magnetically, and she got so she could walk. But in those days, she suffered a great deal of pain, and morphine could be bought over any drugstore counter, like you buy Anacin or aspirin today. The result was that she would take morphine to relieve the pain. And when she had it, she was an angel. And when she didn't have it, which was most of the time, she was a devil. Many a time she's gone to Father and told him lies about we children. She's gone to Father and told him lies about we children. And Father, without caring to take the time to investigate whether it was right or wrong or good or bad, would beat we kids up. And when I say beatings, I mean just that. My sister Nay is a derelict today from the injuries she received from these beatings. My sister Jessie died from abscesses in her head from beatings that she got. I have a very marked curvature that I've carried ever since those boyhood days. I've suffered pain every hour of the day down through the years. I don't ask for any sympathy. It was just one of the burdens that I had to bear. I think I've done so quite gracefully, carrying on in spite of the suffering. On one of these beatings, I got a fracture, the 12th dorsal and first lumbar. Eventually, it united and healed and I ankylosed. Then you'll recall a few years ago, in order to demonstrate the recoil adjustment, I averaged about 200 adjustments on 200 people per afternoon in the auditorium during the Lyceum week. And I broke it open. And it's still open. It has not united. And I suffer a great deal from it. And it was from the effects of that you'll recall I had the two necessary surgeries of last year. Fortunately, came through without any serious trouble. Now, it was in 1890 that Father, as a magnetic healer, began to raise questions in his own mind. And let me show you the process of his thinking. And incidentally, it's interesting to note that Father, when he began thinking, began to try to, correlate or systematize his thinking by writing his ideas in longhand on paper. And as he would write, he would rewrite and rewrite, as any good author will. And then, instead of carrying up the sheets of paper and throwing them away, he would throw them just as they were in the wastebasket. And even though I was only 9 years of age, I used to go every night to his wastebasket and save those papers and put them together. And I have today all of those original writings of his. And once in a while, I get them out, go over them, to review the process of thinking. Now, 1890 was 5 years before the baby was named. It was in 1895 that the name Chiropractic was applied. But in 1890, he began to think. You know, it takes 280 days to give birth to a baby before you know whether you want to call it John or Jeanette. And so it was with Father. Now, his ideas that covered 5 years of thinking, which you and I can cover in 5 minutes, showing how slow the process of origination of thinking something radically new is. And so when I reflect back upon how slow Father was in correlating his ideas, I sometimes think that perhaps I'm unjust with you and not giving you the time to percolate these ideas into your mind. Because ideas grow, and growth is slow, whether it be today or then. Now, Father, as a magnetic healer, had 2 treating rooms in which he had a big leather couch. The patient would lie down on the couch on the back. Then Father would sit alongside on a little stool, and he would place his hands on the body. And when he began in 1885, he would rub the body, rub it from head to foot. And I've seen him many a time rub down an arm and then crack his fingers, as much as to say, I'm taking the pain out of your arm and then I'm casting it out of my body. Peculiar little things like that he used to do. But as he went along, the first thought was, why should I rub the whole of the body when it's only the liver that's sick? Now that was a great step forward to him. The second thought, which didn't come for months afterwards, was, why should I rub the whole of the body when only the liver is involved? Therefore, why not flow my magnetism into the liver instead of all of the human body? Then he waited a long time for the third thought to come, which was, why should I put 2 hands over the liver and let them rest there idle for 15 minutes, which was the length of his treatment? Then the next thought was, showing how slow thought comes, I will place 1 hand over the liver and 1 hand on the back under the liver, and I will pour my magnetism from the right positive hand to the left negative hand, and thus flow it into the liver and strengthen the liver. Then his next thought was, why should the liver be sick at all? Why isn't the stomach sick? Why isn't the spleen sick? Why should the liver be specifically sick? Then his next thought was, it's sick because it isn't getting its life. Now you see how quickly we can go over the field? It took him 5 years to make these successive steps. And the next thought was, why isn't it getting its life? And the next thought, where does the life come from? Why, it comes from the brain. Then the next thought was, why isn't it getting from the brain to the liver? And there he was stumped. And there he was stumped until the Harvey Lillard episode. And let me repeat that. Harvey Lillard was his janitor. And Harvey Lillard was a colored man. Father said to him one day, Harvey, how long have you been deaf? Father said, 17 years. Well, what was the occasion of your going deaf, Harvey? Well, I was in a stoop cramped position, and I heard and felt something pop in my neck. Father said, let me look at your neck. So Harvey took off his coat and collar and shirt. Father looked at the neck. And there, by one of those miraculous chances in 1,000 cases, was a great big protuberance of a bump sticking way out. And Father pressed on it. And when he did, Harvey winced with pain. And he said, that hurts. Father said, well, now showing you the line of thinking. If the production of this bump destroys hearing, the reduction of this bump ought to restore hearing. And so he asked Harvey to lay down on the floor, and for 3 successive days, Harvey pushed that bump, and Harvey's hearing was completely restored. Then Father got to thinking, now why did the reduction of this bump restore hearing? I don't understand this thing. Remember that Father had no anatomical knowledge, physiological knowledge, symptomatology, or anything else. All he knew was rubbing a body. Then he began to think, now what was this bump? And he bought a Gray's Anatomy. Pardon me, and he began to study the spinal column. And eventually, out of that came the idea of a vertebral subluxation. Then Father said, now if the reduction of one bump restored hearing in one man, then maybe the same bump exists in other deaf people. So he went through his magnetic patients and picked out the deaf people and said, let me look at your necks. And one by one they did. In some, he found small bumps. Many of them, he didn't find any bumps at all. And of course, he did nothing where he didn't find any bumps, and he did something where he did. And once in a while, somebody's hearing was restored. Then the next step. Well, if the production of one bump up in the neck destroys hearing and the reduction of it restores hearing, there might be other bumps in the spinal column. And those might be destroying the health of other organs. And then he began to look at backbone. And out of it, of course, eventually came what Reverend S.H. Weed, a Greek scholar, named chiropractic because of being done by hand. Now, it was named in 1895 by Reverend S.H. Weed, and incidentally, the whole Weed family were Weeds. There wasn't any of the family that was under 6 foot. So they were literally correctly named. But he was a preacher over here at Kelowna, Illinois. The whole Weed family, as far as I know, have passed out of the picture. We had Reverend Weed a few years ago at one of our lyceums, the last time he ever appeared there. I mention this merely to show you the growth of a movement and how slow it was. And that was named in 1895. Now, jumping from that on up to a little later life, as I have told you, we children went through many, many hardships. I became what was called an alley cat and a wharf rat in this town. I slept in dry goods boxes, getting the paper out of many of them into one, packing the paper into the one, crawling into it like a rat into a nest, keeping the open face of the box against the brick wall. I've slept many and many a night when it was way below zero, cold as could be. I've slept under sinks in hotels, and in summers on the wharf in the boats. Just quickly, it's quite a jump from that to this. Quite a change. Now, during those days, when I was an alley cat and a wharf rat, I worked in a department store, H.A. St. Orange and Company. My number was number 53. In those days, being located on 2nd and Brady Street, underneath Father's place of business, I became the special delivery boy. In those days, Davenport was a river raft town. It was a rough and ready town. It was an open town, wide open town. Al Jolson got his start singing in Brick Monroe's joint down in the district. Billy Sunday got his start down in one of these joints, for he was then located out here at the Soldiers' Orphans Home. Now the whole district, the Tenderloin district of Davenport, was from Perry to the bridge and from the river up to Fifth Street, about 20 blocks of an open, wide district, said to be the second most wicked city in the world, next to Irkutsk, Siberia. And it was wide open. There wasn't anything that wasn't countenanced and endorsed and supported in that district. Now, you know the life of those people is interesting. At 7 o'clock at night, they turn on the lights. They doll themselves all up with silks and satins and paint and powder, rouge, have their hair all done up in beautiful form. They turn on the Nickelodeon with nickel in the slot pianos. They begin drinking their whiskeys and ryes and gins, and everything is running high up till about 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning. Then they turn in to go to sleep. H.A. there at St. Anne's and Company had all the business from that district. And about noon or 1 o'clock, 53, yes, Mr. St. Anne's, take these things down to Mame Ferguson's, down to Lottie's. And so little 53 would trot down to the house. I'd knock on the door. The Negro maid would let me in. Go on up to number 6, kid. So kid went up to number 6 and knocked on the door. A nice, sweet little voice, husky. Come on in. So I went in, and here was a man and a woman in bed. The little panties were on the floor, torn to pieces. The nightgown wasn't presentable. You'd have thought the wreck of a Hesperus had gone through there. I saw it in all of its filth the morning after the night before. Every day I go to some house. I saw it the morning after, with all of its filth and drunkenness and dirt and disease and everything else. It was a mighty fine lesson for me. I knew all those girls by their first name. There was Lottie, and there was Jane, and name, all that sort of thing. Some years later, when we was given a banquet down at the Black Hawk, one night, some gorgeously dressed woman was sitting in the foyer. She looked up and smiled at me. And I went over and I said, I don't place you. She said, why, I used to be named Ferguson. Oh, I said, of course. She said, I thought I recognized you. The name run the most notorious houses of all of them. One day after I had moved up here on the hill and got practicing, a nice sweet voice called me and said, this is Lottie. I said, Lottie who? Well, Lottie, you know. And I said, yes, I think I do. She said, I want you to go out and see my mother. 8 miles out of Washington, Iowa. She's paralyzed. They've given her up. And I said, all right, I'll take the afternoon train. She said, my brother will meet you at the depot and drive you out to the farm. Lo and behold you, when I got on the local train, who was in the car but Lottie? Well, what would you do? That's what I did. I sat down with Lottie, and we talked and chatted. We got to Washington, the brother met us and took us out to the farm. I looked over the mother and gave her an adjustment. And then Lottie said, now you can't go home until the 4 o'clock train in the morning. There's only one extra bed in the home, so you go in and sleep on that bed. And I'll wake you up in time so you can check Mother in the morning. I said, that's fine. So she woke me up at 4 in the morning, and after I had looked over Mother, I jokingly said to Lottie, now Lottie, I slept in one half of this bed tonight. You sleep in the other half the rest of the night. And she did. But I came home and made the mistake of telling a certain individual, Lottie and I slept in the same bed last night. I wished I hadn't said it. I never heard the end of it. But it was perfectly innocent, and I'm reciting it to you, merely to show you how sometimes innocence abroad can be brutally misconstrued. I mention this merely to show that as a boy, I saw the rough and the seamy side of life at its very worst, which has always been with me from that time to this. Now, it was when I was a boy working at the department store that I had one of the most interesting experiences of my life that I don't think has ever been equaled anywhere else in the world. You've all heard about the steamboat race of the Natchez and the Robert E. Lee. You've seen pictures of it. Well, see, we saw that here 4 times a day for 2 years. Every day, those races. And let me tell you the story because it's interesting. John Streckfus, living in Rock Island, had a lumber boat. Meanwhile, the lumber forests had gone denuded up north. There's no more rafts coming down. And we had the Bernie Swain. It was a very fast little boat. And he had this running as a packet from Clinton, 40 miles north, to Davenport. They would leave Clinton at 7 o'clock in the morning, come down, be in Davenport at 10 o'clock, go back at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and get to Clinton about 7 o'clock in the evening. A 4-hour trip. $3 round trip. That went on for several years. But a man named Joe Long, having a boat called the Joe Long, decided he wanted to enter this business. So, he left Davenport in the morning at 7 and went to Clinton, getting up there about 11, turning around, leaving there at 3, coming down here and getting in at 7. Now, here was 2 boats, different ownerships, going in 2 opposite directions the same day. No races yet. But John Streckfus didn't like Joe Long coming in on his territory. So he bought the Winona. The Winona now was a big boat, a heavy boat, a regular rafting boat. And he pitted the Winona against the Joe Long. Now here was a fast little boat, the Joe Long, and the Winona, a big heavy boat. They both would pull out of Davenport at 7 o'clock in the morning, go over to Rock Island, and then both would whistle for the draw, sometimes going through both sides of that draw at the same time, and then remembering that from that bridge up to LeClaire was 18 miles of jagged rapids, which the government required a boat had to have a rapids pilot, not the boat pilot, a rapids pilot, to steer them through. Many a time those boats would pull through both sides of that draw, and in order to keep into the narrow channel of those rapids, would get close to each other and hug each other and suck to each other so they couldn't get apart. And the people on each boat would swear at the people on the other boat. And feeling was running high. Well, naturally, Joe Long didn't like the Winona against the Joe Long. So he steps out and buys the boardman. And he pits the boardman against the Bernie Swain. Well, the Boardman was a great big tub of a thing, and they used to come down from Clinton every day. And people would flock down to the shores long about 10 o'clock to see which boat would whistle for the draw first. And then oftentimes come through that draw, on both sides of the draw, both whistling for Davenport to see which one would land first. Well, that kept up 1 year. The Joe Long against the Winona, the Vernie Swain against the Boardman. But the next year they switched around, and they put the speedy little Joe Long against the speedy little Vernie Swain, and the big heavy Winona against the big heavy Boardman. Now there were some real races. Thousands of people used to flock down to the river banks to see those boats race both ways. You know where I was mixed up in it? I was a runner for Joe Long. I'd go down to the street and grab somebody's bags and say, "You come on, I'll put you on the Joe Long. Or I'll put you on the Boardman." I was plugging for Joe Long. Why? Myrtle Long. I was secretly in love with Myrtle Long. I never spoke to her. She never spoke to me. But I would see her on the boats. And oh, how I as a kid used to look up to that gorgeous Myrtle Long. But that's as far as it ever went. I don't know where she is today, and I've often wondered. Myrtle Long. Oh, she was a beautiful girl. Beautiful girl. Those races continued for 2 years. And those were exciting days. Well, those races every day. Finally, it came to a trial where Joe Long stabbed the agency for the John Stexel's boats. And he was convicted. It was a long trial. Well, I mention that merely to show you that I'd mixed up into a lot of things when I was a kid. Now, later on, we had a spiritualist camp up at Clinton, Iowa. In fact, we have them every year. They meet, I think they're in session about now. They should be the latter part of August, the fore part of September. Will Kellogg and Mary Kellogg, who were Father's closest friends for many, many, many years, that lived at New Boston, Illinois, when Father lived down there, were in some capacity in the spiritualist camp at Clinton every year for 40 years. President, vice president, secretary, treasurer, gate tender, dining room. He held some position every year for 40 years. I saw Will Kellogg and Mary about 7 years ago. And I said, "Will, you have seen materializations in Clinton at the camp meeting for 40 years. Now I want to ask you a very frank question. Have you ever seen an honest, bona fide materialization in any seance?" He said, "BJ, after 40 years, seeing the best of them, I never have. There is no such thing." Father used to go up there every once in a while and spend a Sunday at the camp meeting. And it was up there that he met A.T. Still, the founder of osteopathy. And even though I was fairly young, I remember very distinctly of those two getting into an argument. A.T. Still arguing that the rule of the artery is supreme, and Father arguing that the rule of the nerve was supreme. And they got quite a crowd gathered around to hear those two giants arguing over their respective sciences. That's the only time my father ever met A.T. Still. And quite a while ago, the osteopaths used to say that Father studied osteopathy in Kirksville. And he knew A.T. Still intimately and all that, which was never true. And in order to squelch it, I offered $50,000 to anybody who could prove that my father ever was in Kirksville or ever passed through the town on train or any other way, which he never was. So that squelched it, and it was never challenged. Now, that was interesting because Father was, as a matter of religion, a spiritualist. And I want to make that distinction between spiritualism as a religion and spiritualism as a business. This seance thing, dollar per around the circle stuff, which is purely a business. Father never had any countenance whatsoever for the business end of the thing. But he did believe in this innate intelligence thing. Now you see where his mind was working, where it was leading? He knew that somewhere in behind some of this thing there was something that was tangible, that was factual, that was real. And so he began to study. And eventually he came to the innate intelligence idea. Now let me make two thoughts clear. I think I stated somewhere recently, I have a copy of every book that's ever been published on orthopedic surgery. Why? Because they are the people who treat the backbone more than any other group of the medical profession. And I have gone through those books meticulously to try to find where they may have used the term vertebral subluxation. I have found the word, or two words, once only in one book, so that you can see that the terminology, vertebral subluxation, is not common to orthopedic surgery. Neither would it be common to any other phase of surgery, because orthopedic surgery would get the closest to it. The word innate is not new. It means inherent or born with. But Father was the first one to coin the language, innate intelligence. Now the word subluxation is not new. You'll find that running all through orthopedic surgery. But they always refer to all of the other articulations of the body and never to the spinal column. Never use the word subluxation in reference to the spinal column, because it was their concept that if anything got out of alignment in a spinal column, it had to be either a fracture or a dislocation or a fracture dislocation or a dislocation fracture, and they are not the same. Now that backs up to another angle of Father's thinking. The vertebral subluxation, when he finally reached that point, he now figured that he had something that was new, and he had. The vertebral subluxation was new in science, new in the realms of men. Now I deplore, and I would chastise, and I would bastardize, if I could, anybody and everybody that publicizes today the statement that Father did not discover something new, that it existed back in Greek history. That's the most damnable lie that was ever told on a man that discovered the great thing that he did. Now that comes down through the book by Dr. Legelis, a Greek scholar. If you've seen his book, I want to call your particular attention to the last chapter in his book, which I have copied in one of my recent books entire. In there he says there is no truth to that statement. Notwithstanding, he affirms it in all the other chapters of his book. He closes with the chapter that there is no truth to the statement. Now, if you don't believe it, go get Legelis' book yourself and read the last chapter, which I have quoted in one of my books. So I hope that you will scotch that lie and quote Legalis himself as the one who lied that started the movement that certain people today are perpetuating, not that they want to take any honors away from Father, but they want to take them away from me. In other words, they're perfectly willing to scuttle the profession if they can get their revenge on a man they don't like, because he adheres to his father's work. I mention that merely in the showing. Now I can look backward from today and realize that the orthopedic surgeons and the surgeons generally were sound in their conclusions.